What's going on, guys? It's Nick here, back with another video. Must own and avoid mid-round running backs. I'll be taking a look at 6 running backs today, going in that 6th, 7th, early 8th round range, and giving my thoughts on their value this season. Obviously, I'm only talking about 6 running backs, so if you want my take on every running back along with every other position, you can see that at our website, thefantasyfootballadvice.com. So let's start things off with the stat of the day. Yesterday's stat was which wide receiver had the highest drop rate in 2019. The answer was Deebo Samuel. I promise this had nothing to do with the injury. It's just the stat that was scheduled. Hate to kick him while he's down, but it is what it is. Adrian Moore was the first to get that one right. Today's stat, among top 10 quarterbacks last season, this is top 10 for fantasy, of course, only one had fewer than 210 rushing yards. Who was it? All right, so let's go over some mid-round running backs. We'll start off with David Montgomery being taken on average 62nd overall, which is roughly the early 6th round. And purely looking at opportunity, Montgomery is probably the biggest steal in drafts. Unfortunately, he had that volume last season and he didn't do all that much with it. Had 267 touches, which is an insane amount for a rookie to get, and had 87.5% of his team's carries inside the 5-yard line. That was the second highest percentage in the league. He scored 7 touchdowns despite playing for the Bears, who were 29th in scoring, and he ranked 7th in attempts per broken tackle. Yet despite all of that, he ranked 32nd in points per game among running backs, which is pretty unusable for being honest. That's the bad news. The good news is the Bears did nothing in free agency or the draft to back him up, so we should expect him to, at worst, repeat that volume, but likely, since he wasn't really the go-to guy right at the beginning of the season, he'll likely have more volume than that over the course of the full year. And so even though people really don't want to touch anyone on the Bears offense, that's mostly recency bias. I mean, 2 years ago, they were 12-4 and ranked 10th in scoring. So you gotta think, if Trubisky doesn't get any better, Foles will take over. And if Trubisky does get better, then the offense is going to improve. So I wouldn't look through the lens of you can't touch anyone in the Bears because that doesn't make too much sense. It's a pretty condensed market share and they're going to be better than last season. And so if that ends up happening, Montgomery probably is one of the better values in drafts right now. So he is a guy I would target. Cam Akers is next, going 73rd overall, early 7th round. He was taken with the 20th pick in the 2nd round this season, and that's just 1 year after the Rams traded up to take Henderson in the 6th pick, or with the 6th pick of the 3rd round last season, I guess 2 seasons ago. One thing I want to make clear is that the Rams like both running backs. This isn't a situation where they're just done with Henderson. They drafted Akers to just completely take over. McVay has said he likes all 3 running backs. Now, we can feel pretty confident saying the job is between Henderson and Akers for the lead role, right? But it's honestly impossible right now for us to know who's going to win the job. The betting markets do seem to think that Akers will, but until we get some sort of indication on what the split might be, you're really just guessing. And especially with this limited offseason, it is possible that, especially to start the season, they do lean more towards Henderson because at least he has 1 season. He didn't play all that much last year, but he was still on the team for a full year, whereas Akers, he's not getting this work in the offseason. So I haven't been taking Akers just because there is more uncertainty than the players who are going around him. But if you feel fully confident that this is Akers' job, he's going to win it, then he would end up being a really nice value in the 7th round. So I honestly think it comes down to your personal take. Do you think Akers is going to win this job? If you do, draft him. If you think it's probably more of a split, then I would tend to avoid. And that is kind of the way I'm leaning, so I haven't taken him. I don't believe in any mock drafts. Next up, we have Raheem Mostert going 62nd overall, early 6th round. I will have 0 shares of Mostert this season because I don't see the upside in drafting him. So it's just not worth the risk. I mean, he's 28 years old, which typically isn't the age where running backs break out, right? You don't see 28-year-old breakouts very often. I'm not saying it can't happen, but it's pretty unusual. And look at how small the sample size is. I mean, he was never given more than 111 touches in a season in college, and through 5 years as a pro, he has less than 200 total touches. We've seen less than 10 good games from him in his career, so it's fair to question how much they'll lean on him, especially considering how little they used him in the receiving game. I mean, he has 34 career targets, with his most in a game being 4. And even when they were using him a ton in the playoffs last season, because that's what everyone wants to look at, projecting into this year, he only had 3 receptions for 8 yards in their 3 combined games in the playoffs last season. So I just don't really see it. I think you're much better off targeting other players in this range. Next up is Sony Michel, 82nd overall, late 7th round. And I'm definitely not against drafting Sony. I'm just very unlikely to take him personally. I don't think he's a terrible pick. I want to make that clear. So if you're someone who really likes him, I don't think that's a mistake. I'm just not on board with it. My problem is the upside. 216 and 259 touches in his first 2 seasons. But because they don't use him in the passing game, he's only turned that into the running back 31 and 38 in points per game. I mean, it's so bad that even in these games where he's getting 2 and 3 touchdowns, he's still barely getting over 20 fantasy points. I mean, you should be a good amount over 20 fantasy points if you have 3 touchdowns, right? And he's just not. He just doesn't have any weekly upside. Even guys like Montgomery, Jordan Howard, Latavius Murray, Tony Pollard, they all have 20 or more fantasy points in a greater percentage of games than Sony does. He just has no weekly ceiling, and there's actually a solid amount of risk given that White isn't going anywhere, Harris is in his 2nd season, and he has one of the highest injury risks of any player, not even just running backs. So I guess if you really want to take him as the running back 29, you think he improves from the past 2 seasons and maybe produces like a low-end running back 3 in points per game, then go for it. But I would rather target players who have upside in this range. And one of those players is Kareem Hunt. You guys know I love his ADP. He's going 78th overall, mid-7th round, and he's just a vastly superior pick to Sony because he comes with all that upside and realistically a much higher floor. Hunt is going to be at worst a high-end running back 3 this season, but in all likelihood he'll be a running back 2 with top 3 upside if Chubb goes down. The Browns are going to run a ton of 21 personnel, which is 2 running backs, a tight end, and 2 wide receivers, because that's their best set. Their best 5 players are Odell, Landry, Hooper, Chubb, and Hunt. So why wouldn't you want to have all of them on the field at the same time? And when they want to go to 3 receivers, they're going to use Hunt in the slot a lot. So you guys have heard my take on Hunt a million times. I think he's the best running back value on the season. And if he stays in the mid-7th round, he should be on 100% of your teams. The last running back we'll go over today actually goes in the early 8th round, but that's close enough for this video, and that's Marlon Mack, being taken 87th overall. And I don't hate his ADP, I just won't be drafting him there. I had him listed as an avoid for a while, but I only have him 1 spot below ECR, so I took him off the avoids list. If you promised me 16 fully healthy weeks from Jonathan Taylor, there's no way I would draft Mack anywhere, even in the later rounds. I just don't see the upside as long as the both of them are healthy for Mack to produce usable numbers. But he does have running back 1 upside if Taylor were to get injured, and you can't just ignore that. I do see a difference between him and Hunt that I do want to point out though. Hunt could easily finish as a top 3 running back if Chubb goes down, but that's not in Mack's range of outcomes. And while everyone is healthy, Hunt will be flex viable, and I just can't say the same for Mack. So Hunt is for sure more valuable, but that doesn't mean that you can't take a shot on both of them, especially if you go wide receiver heavy to start, maybe you take a tight end early as well, then maybe Mack is a player that you'd want to go after for his upside. It all depends on what you're looking for with the pick. So that's my take on a bunch of mid-round running backs this season. If you want to see my full list of players to target and avoid, you can do so at our website, thefantasyfootballadvice.com. That's the end of this one. Hope you all did enjoy. If you did, how about hitting that like button, and how about subscribing to the channel if you're new? Thanks for watching.